Today I'm going to show you how you can start off with a crochet doily and starch it and turn it into a bowl. But even if you don't crochet, don't click off this video. Your options for getting a crochet doily are, of course, you can make one yourself. I made this one using a pattern from a booklet from my great-grandmother. But even if you don't crochet, craft stores like Hobby Lobby or Michael's often sell already made up crochet doilies. So either make yourself a round doily or grab one from the store, and I'll show you how to starch it into a very cute bowl. So here's the doily that I'm using, and I'm going to use a sugar starching recipe from a pattern booklet from my great-grandmother. You can opt for a different method of starching, like using a glue mixture or flour starch. Each method has their own pros and cons, and I'm actually working on a video for Christmas where I show several different starch options to starch some angels and snowflakes. So keep an eye out for that video in the coming months if you want to see other options for starching projects. But anyways, for the doily bowl, I went with the sugar starch because it is very simple and it's a cheap option. We just need sugar and water. The recipe specifically calls for a half cup water and a half cup of sugar, which is the amount I made, but really it's just a 1-to-1 ratio of water and sugar. So the first step is to mix the water and sugar, then bring to a boil. I kicked my burner on right away because I'm impatient like that, but then I stirred to mix the sugar into the water. The sugar won't completely dissolve until we reach the boiling point, which I believe is the purpose behind boiling. We don't want to caramelize the sugar like when making candy, so do pay close attention to when it starts boiling. Since I was boiling such a small amount, it reached a boil in about 3 minutes, and you can see the water turn clear as the rest of the sugar dissolves in. The instructions caution against burning the mixture, but for me, it didn't even get close to that point. I did stir the entire time, so that probably helped. As soon as it started to boil, I removed it from heat and let it cool. Now I was planning to starch my projects that night, but I didn't get to it, so instead I popped the mixture into a mason jar and stuck it in the fridge. The next day I was ready to starch my project, so I needed to set up a mold that my doily could dry on. I debated between 2 bowl sizes, but finally settled on the larger bowl. Whatever size bowl you choose, you will need to have a bit of the doily hanging off the edge of the bowl when stretched out. This way you can pin down that edge to ensure the doily holds the shape of the bowl. You'll see what I mean in a moment. We also need a surface that we can pin the edge of the bowl to. I have some thick styrofoam sheets that I saved from a food delivery box, and I wrapped it in the brown paper for some contrast because my camera had a really hard time with the white doily on the white styrofoam. Once I have my bowl and styrofoam ready, I covered them both with cling wrap. We'll also need some pins at the ready, and I kept a damp paper towel nearby to clean my hands and work surface if needed. Now with the pins, rust-free pins are preferred because the metal can leave a stain on your project, but I'm just using what I had on hand. And now it's time for the fun part, starching the project. The basic idea is to wet your project in clean water, dip into the starch mixture, and lastly pin into place. I'm guessing the reason that they say to dip into plain water first is so that the starch absorbs in more consistently throughout the project, but I forgot this step for the doily. However, I think it turned out better without getting it wet first, but it did require some more work. I starched a couple other projects while working on the bowl, and the ones that I dipped in plain water before dipping in the starch didn't turn out quite as stiff and sturdy as my bowl turned out. So because my doily wasn't already wet, I had to squeeze out all the air to make sure the entirety of my doily was saturated with water, and I nearly overflowed my little jar in the process. So this is the part that takes a little more work if your project is dry, because you want to ensure that it is completely saturated with the starch. But basically, I dipped in the starch, made sure the entire project was soaked with the sugar water, and then placed it on my mold. I love this part of the instructions because they literally say the project, quote, will now be a sticky, soggy mess, end quote, and yes, it was. So just a reminder to make sure that your bowl and work surface are appropriately protected. Anyways, I spread the doily across the bowl, and now I'm going to stretch out the edges and pin to the styrofoam that the bowl is sitting on. First, I pinned the large points of my doily, and I placed the pin through the same spot of the pattern on each point. Then once I stretched and pinned one point, I pinned the point on the opposite side just to even out my tension. I did this with all 8 of the points of my doily, working opposite sides one after another. Then I decided I wanted to stretch it just a little bit more for better definition. Typically you want to stretch more versus less, and the instruction booklet recommends stretching as far as possible. I think how much you stretch your project depends a little bit on what it is, but generally the end result looks better if you stretch it more, at least in my opinion. Be sure to pin as evenly as possible for an even finished look. After I pinned the main points, I pinned the little nubs in between those main points. Since the main shape was already established, I just worked around as I pinned these versus working on opposite sides each time. Now your doily probably won't have the same points and details that mine does, so be sure to adjust pinning according to your doily's design. And remember that the way it looks when you're done pinning is how it will look when it's dried, so be sure to pin as much detail as you want. Based on my camera footage, pinning took me about 8 minutes, which seems kind of long in hindsight, but it was actually a lot of fun. Once I was satisfied with my pinning, I took it outside to dry. This might not be the best idea because the wind could blow debris onto the project and it might attract bugs, but fortunately my project did just fine outside, except for having to chase my cat off the table once or twice. And now for the hard part, waiting on it to dry. I started my project on a Sunday evening and it wasn't completely dry until the following Sunday. After that first evening of drying on the porch, I brought it inside to dry because we had a lot of rain coming through. The top of the bowl dried in about 2 days, but because of gravity pulling the starch down towards the bottom, the point stayed extremely soggy for a long time. I spent a little bit of time blow drying the bowl, but I made sure to use low heat so I didn't melt the plastic wrapper styrofoam. What I did find though is the best way to get it to dry is to set the project outside in full sun. We finally got back to sunny weather and I set the project in full sunlight and it dried so much faster. After 2 days of leaving it in bright sunlight for a few hours each day, my doily bowl dried completely. Now, very important, I said dried completely. If you think it's still damp, it's better to leave it on the form and wait just a little bit longer. But once it's completely dry, all we have to do is remove the pins. Most of this was pretty easy, but about 10 to 20% of the pins were a little tricky to get out because the sugar had glued them down to the doily. So pliers might help to get really stuck pins out, or you can twist the pins to loosen them like I did. Once all the pins were out, I just popped it off the plastic wrap, and this is how my doily bowl turned out. I think this doily looks so pretty as a bowl, and it's actually very sturdy too. I wouldn't set like a heavy book or anything on top of this, but I do think it will hold up pretty well. If I squeeze it gently, it has a little give, but it springs right back to the starch shape. This bowl would make a great key basket, a cute remote holder, or even a decorative centerpiece filled with flowers, baubles, or even fake mini pumpkins. I hope y'all enjoyed this project and maybe it inspires you to try starching your own crochet projects. The process of starching is a lot of fun, and it's a great way to expand the types of items you can create with crochet. I'd love to hear in the comments what items you've starched in the past or what items you want to try starching in the future, and of course, if you enjoyed the video, consider letting me know by hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching my video and happy crafting!